D-Day for Ukraine as Russian troops remain locked and loaded to storm Kyiv despite Putin saying he doesn't want avert. Russian troops remain locked and loaded to storm Ukraine, Defense Secretary Ben Wallace has said. His warning comes despite Vladimir Putin insisting he doesn't want war and Russia producing footage of its forces pulling back. Ukrainian soldier Private Andrei holds his weapon while watching from a bunker. Getty. Vladimir Putin has denied any aggressive intent to Ukraine. AFP. It comes as U.S. intelligence fears a full-scale Russian invasion could be launched within hours, starting a conflict the scale of which has not been seen since World War II. However, as last-minute and high-level diplomatic talks continue in a frantic bid to avert a devastating war that could kill millions, for now the region remains in a fragile state of calm. Russia insisted that it was returning more troops and weapons to bases and put out video showing tanks as well as other vehicles leaving the Crimean peninsula. The move is being treated with skepticism, with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg saying that on the contrary more troops were being built up. Speaking at a NATO meeting in Brussels, Mr. Wallace urged serious caution, warning Russia was still geared up to invade and said it should be judged on its actions. Russia has the size of forces now gathered and at readiness, locked and loaded to some extent, ready to go should they wish to do so from yesterday, and that has proved to be exactly right, he said. Mr. Wallace said latest intelligence shows that 60% of Russian land combat power remains on the Ukrainian border along with significant naval forces at sea. I think what we haven't seen is evidence of withdrawal which has been claimed by the Kremlin, he said. Instead we have seen strategic buildup of things like field hospitals and strategic weapons systems. But Mr. Stoltenberg said Russia seemed to be in fact building up its forces towards its border with Ukraine. We have not seen any de-escalation on the ground. On the contrary, it appears that Russia continues their military buildup, Stoltenberg said, ahead of a crunch meeting of the alliance. Russia denies all aggressive intent to Ukraine. It is feared today could be the day for a false flag attack by Russia, a staged incident that would be used as justification for an invasion. Dawn broke over Ukraine without a shot being fired or the first missiles falling, but the atmosphere remains tense. Plans are today in place for a day of unity vigil across the nation. Ukrainians will be urged to stand together defiantly at 10 a.m. to sing the national anthem. Kyiv has called for calm as preparations have continued for a possible invasion by Russia, with everyday people taking up arms. Putin is keeping the West guessing for his next move as NATO defense ministers will today meet in Brussels. Russia continues to have around 130,000 remain on Ukraine's eastern and southern borders with around 40,000 pro-Putin forces in Belarus to the north. And then Russian lawmakers urged Putin to recognize rebel-held areas in eastern Ukraine as independent states. Mr. Wallace will join NATO Chief Stoltenberg and U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin amid ongoing tensions in Eastern Europe as the alliance considers its response. He said there continues to be a buildup of missiles and field hospitals in the region, and we should be cautious of the Kremlin. What we haven't seen is evidence of withdrawal that has been claimed by the Kremlin, Mr. Wallace said. Putin had said he was open to further dialogue with the US and its NATO allies. We have seen no evidence at all of Russian withdrawals, precisely the opposite in fact. Russia is continuing to reinforce its positions on the Ukrainian border, a Western source told the Daily Mail. Russia is staging a new frenzy of new military deployments close to Ukraine. East to West. Ukrainian soldiers hold drills preparing to defend their homes. AP. Kyiv and Moscow have been feuding for the past 8 years as Russia doesn't like the fact Ukraine is becoming closer to the west. And the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine has been at war since 2014 as Russian-backed separatists fight to break away from the Kyiv. Both former Soviet states used to be allies, but Ukraine's government now seeks to draw closer ties to the US, UK and Europe, potentially even joining NATO. Prime Minister Boris Johnson had earlier suggested there were mixed signals coming out of Russia about the prospect of an invasion of Ukraine, describing the situation as not encouraging. US President Joe Biden, meanwhile, gave a televised address in the United States, in which he said an invasion was still possible and stressed the US would defend all NATO territory. In a televised address, he said, "While I will not send American servicemen to fight in Ukraine, we have supplied Ukrainian military with equipment to help them defend themselves, and provided training and advice and intelligence for that purpose. And make no mistake, The United States will defend every inch of NATO territory with the full force of American power. Kyiv Mayor Vladimir Klitschko has said that he hopes for a last-minute diplomatic solution between Russia and Ukraine. It is the first time in the history of Ukraine that so many Russian soldiers stayed at the border, he said. U.S. President Joe Biden warned Russia could still invade credit, AP. Prime Minister Boris Johnson cast doubt over Russia's withdrawal from Ukraine credit, PA. Armed Forces Minister James Heap said he was cautiously optimistic about news some troops were withdrawing from the Ukrainian border, but added he would continue to be very vigilant of Russia's actions. Following a Cobra Emergency Committee meeting, Boris Johnson said the intelligence he has received about Russian military activity is not encouraging, with the construction of field hospitals and the movement of extra forces closer to the border suggesting preparations are still being made for an invasion. While Mr. Johnson acknowledged Russia had claimed it was withdrawing troops from the border, he added there were more battalion tactical groups being brought closer to the border. Mr. Johnson also said he would bring forward a new economic crime bill in order to deal with dirty Russian money in the City of London. Russia was also admonished by Foreign Secretary Liz Truss for failing to send a representative to a European security meeting about the tensions at the Ukrainian border.